The Joey Chitwood Thrill Show. Boy, do I remember the Joey Chitwood Thrill Show when I was a kid. They would do all kinds of tricks with those cars. One would go all the way around the track on two wheels, and another would jump over a group of 5 or 6 cars parked on the front straightaway. I remember them setting a big box ablaze and then jumping over a big ramp and crashing through it. As we will talk about later, our gang would do some of the same tricks on our little soapboxes or on our bicycles. I guess the things kids enjoyed most of all were the clowns. They gave us a reason to smile when we were feeling low. They would stand on the track, and when the cars in the thrill show would come by, the cars would seem to knock their clothes off and leave them standing there with only heart-shaped underwear on. I know this may sound corny, but please remember, we had none of the entertainment that kids do today. As I grew older, I discovered that if you wanted something, there was one sure way to get it: work for it. So that's what I did, as we will see as we continue through this story of my life. Our version of video game. I still remember, as early as 6 years of age, the games we played at the corner of Grace, North 2nd and Joseph Streets. Games like Red Rover and Simon Says, and others we made up as we went along. Hide and seek, blind man's buff, arm wrestling, real wrestling, and on and on. I once went snipe hunting. Did you ever hunt snipes? Asked Tom Harrington. I said no, but he said if you could catch one, they were worth about $100. Do you want to try? He asked. When I said sure, he left and came back a few minutes later with a tote sack, a burlap bag usually used for potatoes. It got the nickname tote sack because that was what people would use to tote stuff, and a candle. He took me to the other side of North 1st Street, behind an old abandoned house, and said, "Get down on your knees right here. Hurry," he told me. They might come this way any time now. I got down on my knees and he handed me a big stick. It was getting dark and I didn't like that much, but I said, "What's this stick for? Will they hurt me?" He said, No, that stick is a calling stick. You hit the ground with it and they will come and get in that tote sack. He told me to hold the sack open, and he said, "I'll come back in a little while to see how you are doing." Well, about 5 hours later, and not a snipe in my sack, my candle long gone out, my knees sore, and my hand tired from beating the ground with that stick, I finally heard someone coming. Only it wasn't Tom. It was an old man we called Uncle Wiley. I startled him, and he said, "What are you doing out here, boy? Don't you know how late it is? It's 11:30. I explained to him what Tom had told me, and he burst out in laughter and said, "Kenneth, did you fall for that old trick?" I never felt so low in all my life. Tom, a fellow I trusted, pulled that on me. Of course, I had to deal with Daddy when I got home, but as I told my story to him, he began to laugh. I never trusted Tom again after that day, though. Day after day, night after night, mostly after school or in the summertime, we had our favorite places to play. Mama and Daddy always knew where we were, because if we said we would be here and we were caught there, well, we didn't like the results. We'd play sometimes for hours on those corners, maybe because they were the few that had street lights. Sometimes the lights would get knocked out and we couldn't play. We couldn't play there until they were replaced. The city workers didn't move very fast, but it would be a big event for us kids to watch them replace that bulb. We lived in a time when electricity was still young. Even the wiring was on the outside of the wall in houses and businesses. The most modern building in our part of town was the Red Shield. We played for keeps. We played on the street corner because none of our yards were very big, except my yard. And it had no grass because we did play there for a while and wore all the grass off the dirt. We finally got tired of my daddy screaming and hollering and stopped playing in the yard, and soon the grass began to grow. Modern conveniences. Indoor plumbing was a luxury, and telephones had what were called party lines, where many homes shared one line. Each household had its own number of rings, and you wouldn't dare listen in on other people's conversation. Ha ha. Many times we did listen in, but don't tell anybody, okay? Phone calls were limited to 10 minutes or so until you were asked to clear the line. I blessed the day we all got our own phone line, for I could talk to girls for hours on end or until I got run off when others needed to use the phone. The milkman brought the milk to our door. The coal man brought coal to our house in an old truck or a horse and wagon. The coal was used for cooking, water heating, and heat. The coal man would pile it up around back of the house, and Mama would often say to one of the bigger kids, "Go get me a scuttle of coal." A scuttle was a bucket with an elongated front to make it easier to pour the coal into the stove or the fireplace. I carried many scuttles of coal in my young life. I wonder how cold you would get today if you depended on the kids to bring in coal and kindling. Most don't even know what coal or kindling is. Cars? Cars were very few and far between, but still we played carefully in the street. I don't remember anyone getting hurt very badly back then, even though in the winter, when we had snow, we would wait for cars to come by slow enough to grab onto the back bumper and slide, sometimes for blocks, then catch another one going the opposite direction and do it all over again. We would slide until our socks froze to the inside of our shoes, or until we couldn't feel our feet anymore. The cold weather didn't seem to bother us back then. It might have been the condition of the houses we lived in, or we were just too silly to realize it. After all, we were having too much fun to stop. We sure did destroy a lot of shoes back then, and Daddy let us know about it. Our almost racetrack. We even tried to put a little racetrack in that yard, but my daddy put a stop to that real quick. A man named Mr. Huddleston had a furniture store and gave us a bunch of lights on a string. We put those lights all over the backyard trying to light our racetrack. There were so many that there was not a fuse in the fuse box big enough to carry them. They kept blowing fuses, and we couldn't figure out why. Somebody told to put a penny behind the fuse, which we did once and almost burned the house down. If my mama hadn't smelled the fuse box burning and pulled the main breaker, the house would have burned. Daddy came home, and when Mama told him what happened, he took his knife and cut all those lights down and threw them in the trash. However, he did keep the bulbs. We all got a whipping and were told never to do anything like that again. That is the kind of mischief we got into back then. We would never think of doing anything that would hurt anyone. Our pals. Although we had many friends, we still seemed to pair off in 2s and 3s at times. Harry Harrington and me, Buddy Wright, James Binkley, Larry Walker, and Ronnie Moulton got to be best buds and played together for hours on end. Of course, Ronnie, James, and I were cousins. Harry Dean and Buddy were close friends. We played at what would be silly or politically incorrect things today, things like cowboys and Indians, spaceman, war games, etc. I wonder if kids still play games like that today, or has the age of computer games and television, videos, and the malls taken their place? Believe it or not, at that time in my life, we had never heard of a television set, unless you consider the picture watch on Dick Tracy's arm. That was as close as we got to a TV set. I remember Johnny Pettigo was the first kid to get a TV set. We wore the buttons off that thing, switching channels. There were only 2 or 3 channels back then. I still remember our first TV, a 12-inch black and white set with a round picture tube. Can you imagine about 10 people trying to watch that little screen? Daddy would say over and over, "Get your little away from that thing. Don't you know it will ruin your eyes?" Daddy's language left a lot to be desired. He was a real cusser. Such shows as